Before we step into Hyderabad's age of refinement and regal artistry, a brief reminder of the journey we have taken so far. In Chapter 1, we witnessed how Mir Kamaruddin Khan, once a loyal Mughal noble, walked away from a dying empire and funded the Asaf Jahi dynasty in 1724, without rebellion, without bloodshed. Chapter 2 took us into the turmoil that followed. Brutal succession struggles, French and British manipulation, and the rise of Nizam Ali Khan, who secured his throne by walking the razor's edge between diplomacy and control. In Chapter 3, we entered the shadow world of colonial influence, how the British didn't conquer Hyderabad by force, but rewrote its destiny through treaties, residents, and invisible strings. The Nizam ruled but did not govern. And yet, amid this quiet erosion of sovereignty, something extraordinary was happening. The court of Hyderabad, now tethered to empire, became a crucible of culture, poetry, education, and artistic rebirth. If you are new here, this channel is for history lovers who crave the untold truths. Without bias, without political propaganda, we tell India's real story the way they deserve to be told. Cinematic, researched, and raw. Hit subscribe and explore more stories like this, from princely states to forgotten revolutions, right here on our channel. So let's get started with Chapter 4, Cultural Renaissance and Royal Patronage. The late 19th century Hyderabad was a paradox. On one hand, it was a princely state under British influence, and its political autonomy slowly fading. But on the other, Hyderabad flourished as one of the most vibrant centers of Indo-Islamic culture in the world. The Nizams may have ceded military and diplomatic control, but they turned inward, towards the arts, architecture, education, and social reform. This wasn't just patronage for prestige, it was a deliberate act of statecraft to create a royal identity that could not be colonized. And at the center of this renaissance was the court language of Urdu. Although Persian had been the official court language for generations, by the 19th century, Urdu was rising fast, elegant and adaptable, deeply rooted in the Deccan. The Nizams recognized Urdu's power, not just as a tool of communication, but as an emotional weapon. It united court elites, religious scholars, poets and general public. Under this patronage, poets like Dag Dehelvi and Amir Minai were invited to the court. Mushairas became nightly rituals. The Nizam's court sponsored the compilation and printing of Urdu dictionaries, journals, and newspapers. Urdu became the language of power, but also of love, protest, longing, and identity. The Nizams practiced a form of inclusive Islam, influenced heavily by Sufi traditions. They funded renovation and protection of ancient dargahs like Dargah Yusufain, Dargah Pahadi Sharif, and many more. Hindu temples, especially those under threat during communal unrest, also received royal protection and funds. Royal edicts encouraged peaceful religious coexistence. Long before, the idea of secularism became constitutional. Unlike many other princely rulers, the Nizams did not impose rigid orthodoxy. They saw religion as a unifying force, not a weapon for control. This spiritual pluralism deeply influenced the architecture, music, and even cuisine of the region. While the British built their bungalows and cantonments, the Nizams turned their gaze upward toward architectural grandeur. Two palaces stand as a testament to their taste and ambition. One is Chowmahalla Palace, meaning 4 palaces. It became the seat of the Asaf Jahi dynasty. Its Khilawat Mubarak, meaning grandeur Darbar Hall, is an Indo-European marvel. Persian chandeliers, Mughal jalis, and neoclassical pillars in one room. It hosted state ceremonies, coronations, and courtly rituals that echoed Delhi's vanished Mughal splendor. Second was Falaknuma Palace. Commissioned by Paiga noble Sir Vikhar ul Umra and gifted to the 6th Nizam, a blend of Italian marble, Tudor ceilings, and Deccani craftsmanship. It housed one of the largest private libraries in India with over 5,000 rare books. It featured an advanced telegraph system, air cooling, and carved wooden furniture imported from the Europe. These were not just palaces, they were statements. The Hyderabad may have bowed diplomatically, but culturally it still ruled. One of the greatest legacies of this renaissance was Osmania University. Funded in 1918, Mir Usman Ali Khan Asaf Jahi VII. What made it revolutionary? It was the first university in India to offer higher education in Urdu. It broke away from colonial models of learning, placing vernacular, Islamic, and modern subjects side by side. Faculties include medicine, law, engineering, and arts, all taught in a language that belonged to the people, not to the colonizers. Osmania became a hub for reformist scholars, legal thinkers, and nationalist youth. Royal women in Hyderabad, though often kept away from the outside world, were not passive figures. Ma Laka Bai Chanda, a 18th century court poet, became the first woman to publish a full Urdu diwan, meaning a collection of poetry in India. Princesses and begums frequently commissioned architecture, funded orphanages, and acted as patrons of Sufi scholars and musicians. During Usman Ali Khan's reign, women's colleges and hostels were established, unthinkable in many other princely states at that time. The role of women in royal household was veiled in tradition, but active in transformation. The Renaissance wasn't confined to palaces. It filtered down into everyday life. Hyderabadi biryani, with its Persian roots and local spices, became a symbol of cultural fusion. Khada dupatta and Sherwanis, often designed in palace-run karkhanas, meaning royal workshops, were adopted by nobles and commoners alike. Qawwalis, ghazals, and classical Deccani rages echoed through the both dargahs and courtyards. Hyderabad became a cosmopolitan city, where Arab traders, French officers, British engineers, Persian calligraphers, and Indian weavers lived side by side. It was quite literally India's last Mughal city, still alive while Delhi was already a ghost. This cultural flourishing wasn't escapism, it was resistance. As British colonialism stripped India of its political spine, Hyderabad turned to language, architecture, memory, and spirituality. The Nizams couldn't win militarily, but they preserved the soul of a dying civilization. They built not empires but legacies, not armies but poems in stone. Where empires faded, Hyderabad composed verses. Where thrones were broken, the Nizams built palaces that touched the stars. Their rule may have been eclipsed by treaties and residents, but their influence still walks the streets of Hyderabad today. In Urdu couplets, in marble columns, in spice of its biryani, and the silence of its dargahs. As the 20th century loomed, Hyderabad stood as a paradox, politically fragile, culturally immortal, but time was running out. And in the next chapter, culture would not be enough to stop a war. If this journey through history's hidden heartlands speaks to you, don't just listen. Subscribe to this channel. This channel is for those who want the truth, free from spin, stripped of bias, and told like a story worth remembering. Up next, Chapter 5, The World of Nizams, Daily Life, Protocol, and Mystique, where we enter the royal court itself and discover the secrets behind its rituals, its hierarchy, and its mystique. Imagine walking up not to an alarm clock, but to melodic recitation of Quran, echoing through palace courtyards, outside your carved teak doors. Servants await your nod, elephants are being fed, the morning darbar is being set. This is not fiction. This was the world of Nizams, where time moved through rituals, power was performed like theatre, and every gesture carried weight of centuries. To rule was one thing, but to appear as a ruler, that was the real performance. In the world of Nizams, power wasn't just about decisions, it was about how you sat, walked, greeted, dressed, and even breathed in public. This court was a living organism, equal parts Mughal, Deccani, British, and Persian. Every gesture, from how the Nizam held his rosary to the way he received petitions, was scripted by centuries of etiquettes. The palace wasn't a home, it was a stage and everyone had a role. The Nizam wasn't just a king, his full title was often His Exalted Highness Nawab Mir Nizam ul Mulk Asaf Jah Fateh Jung Sipah Salar, ruler of the Deccan, defender of the faith. This wasn't excess, it was protocol. Each part of the title represented a function and a legacy. Nizamul Mulk means governor of the realm. Asaf Jah claimed to the biblical Asif bin Barkhia, Solomon's wazir. Fateh Jung, victor in battle. Sipah Salar means commander of armies. Courtly hierarchy mirrored this precision. Prime Minister Diwan oversaw governance. Paiga nobles, descendants of aristocratic lines, ranked just below the royal family. Umra-e-Uzzam, the highest circle of nobles and advisors. Mashirs, Mirzas, and Khans ranked nobility with bureaucratic or military portfolios. Everyone knew their place and everyone performed it with ritualized precision. A typical day in Nizam's life wasn't casual, it was an orchestration. Pre-dawn, Quran recitation and personal prayers. Early morning, audience with key advisors over sharbat or kahwa. Mid-mornings, public darbar in the Chowmahalla Palace or later in King Kothi. Petitioners, nobles and foreign dignitaries appeared according to rank. Afternoon, private leisure, reading, calligraphy, family affairs. Evening, cultural performances, qawwalis, ghazals or readings from Persian and Urdu classics. Late night, political correspondence, review of reports, personal reflection. The Nizam rarely ate in public. Meals were elaborate but deeply private, often eaten in silence with hand-washing rituals performed by designated servants. He did not walk casually. He processed, on foot or on elephant, in robes stitched with gold thread, escorted by guard holding silver-tipped lances. Every silence was a tool, even stillness a message. The Nizams weren't known for flamboyance. The Nizam's personal treasury vaults included over 173 pieces of the famed Nizam's jewelry collection, including the Jacob diamond, weighing over 180 carats, once used as a paperweight. His wardrobe included hand-embroidered sherwanis, khada dupattas, and rumal caps made with silver thread and scented with imported athars. His accessories, swords in jewel-studded sheaths, hand mirror carved from ivory, rosaries made of precious stones. But none of this was gaudy. It was strategic opulence, a visual language of legitimacy in a court where foreigners ruled the region politically. The Nizam ruled aesthetically. In the Darbar, every word had weight. Official orders, meaning farmans, were issued in Persian or Urdu. Court poets delivered verses laced with double meanings, praising the ruler while commenting subtly on the times. Legal matters were handed in a mix of Arabic and Urdu. But more powerful than speech was timing. The Nizam's nod could change a life. His silence could end a career. In a court steeped in hierarchy, knowing when to speak was as vital as knowing what to say. The court wasn't confined to palaces. Elephants were royal vehicles, not just for movement, but for public processions that showcased might and tradition. Falcons, hounds, and cheetahs were raised for shikar, meaning royal hunting. a ritual not of survival but of supremacy over nature. The Nizam's stables housed thousands of horses, many from Arab and Central Asian breeds. These animals were more than companions. They were symbols of endurance, loyalty, and dominion. When the Nizam rode in procession, the city stood still. Children bowed, merchants stopped trading. The very rhythm of life paused and watched. Being the formal power, there was a hidden court. Astrologers consulted before royal marriages or military campaigns. Mystics, meaning fakirs and Sufi saints, were given private audiences. Court healers mixed Unani medicine with spiritual amulets. The Nizam's household was modern in administration but deeply traditional in worldview. They believed in omens, dreams, and the alignment of stars. This wasn't superstition, it was legacy, a belief that kingship was not merely political but cosmic. By the early 20th century, the world outside the palace had changed. The British now ruled not through whispers but through policies. Hyderabad's autonomy was shrinking. Political decisions were being influenced, if not outright dictated from Delhi and London, and yet, inside the palace, the Nizam still reigned like a sovereign. The court maintained its rhythm. The rituals persisted. The hierarchy stood untouched. But it was a world increasingly out of sync with the nationalist tide rising in India. Soon, opulence would not be enough, elegance would not protect, and the mystic would become a liability. To walk through Nizam's palace was to walk through time. Each chamber whispered of a world where power was formed like poetry, measured, meaningful, and deeply human. They built rituals, not rallies, thrones, not pulpits, and their silence often said more than their decrees. But in a world that was speeding up, where nationalism replaced nobility and speeches replaced symbols, the world of the Nizams stood still, and history does not wait for those who do not move. If you have felt the silence behind the sill and sensed the weight behind each gesture, then the story is speaking to you. Subscribe now to keep uncovering India's hidden legacies, free from bias, stripped of noise, and told like cinema. Chapter 6: Economic Powerhouse of the Deccan, where we go beyond the palace and explore how Hyderabad quietly built one of the strongest regional economies in India, complete with its own currency, stamps, and trading empires. In a world obsessed with crowns and jewels, few noticed the real treasure of Hyderabad. It wasn't hidden in the walls of Chowmahalla or beneath the velvet thrones of Falaknuma. It moved in silence, on the backs of traders, in the ink of ledgers, and through bazaars that never slept. While Delhi fell, while Bengal burnt, and while princely states sank into debt, Hyderabad became something few in colonial India ever managed to become: economically sovereign. In the 19th and early 20th century, while most Indian princely states were dependent on British subsidiaries, Hyderabad stood apart. It wasn't just a princely state, it was a self-contained economic engine. It had its own currency, its own taxation system, its own state bank, and GDP rivaling many European microstates. This was not accident. From agriculture to finance, the Nizams and their ministers, especially visionary divans like Salar Jung I, laid down a structure designed for economic autonomy, not colonial dependency. Long before the Reserve Bank of India, Hyderabad printed its own money. The currency was called the Hyderabadi Rupee. Mints operated out of Aurangabad, Hyderabad city, and Warangal. Coins bore Persian inscriptions, the Asaf Jahi crest, and Islamic calendar dates. Unlike British Indian currency, the Hyderabad rupee was silver-based, giving it real commodity value. This meant Hyderabad could conduct trade independently, pay for public works without British clearance, fund its military and royal expenditures without colonial loans. It was one of few states in India with full monetary sovereignty until 1950. Unlike the exploitative zamindari system found in British India, Hyderabad implemented a hybrid land revenue model. Land was assessed by fertility, not just size. Taxes were collected in both kind and coin. Jagirdars, meaning landholders, retained partial control but paid annual dues. District collectors reported to Diwan, not as a colonial officer. This meant revenue stayed within the state. Agricultural surpluses funded local development. Corruption and absentee landlordism were relatively minimized. Hyderabad invested heavily in irrigation tanks, canals, and baulis, meaning step walls, to ensure that agricultural output remained high and consistent even during famines. Hyderabad wasn't just self-sufficient, it was globally connected. Cotton and silk textiles were exported to Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe. The state was known for bedreware, pearls, lacquerware, and carpets. The famed Lad Bazaar and Sultan Bazaar became international hubs for precious stones and metalwork. By the late 1800s, pearls from Basra passed through Hyderabad before reaching London and Paris. Handmade Deccani textiles were shipped to royal courts in Turkey and Iran. Traders from Armenia, Persia, and France settled in the city and opened joint ventures. This was not just a bazaar economy, it was a cosmopolitan trade ecosystem. In 1941, while British India was still managing its colonial reserves through the Imperial Bank, Hyderabad established the State Bank of Hyderabad, SBH. The Nizams personally funded its capital. It reserved as the state's central bank. It issued currency, handled reserves, and financed large infrastructure projects. By the 1940s, State Bank of Hyderabad had branches in Karachi, Bombay, Delhi, Madras, and even Basra in Iraq. This was not just financial independence, it was visionary statecraft. State Bank of Hyderabad would later be merged with the Reserve Bank of India post-annexation, but its model inspired India's state-level banking systems. Under the Nizams, Hyderabad saw the rise of electric grids, Osman Sagar hydroelectric projects, asphalted roads and rail networks connecting the interior to the coasts, postal services independent from British India, modern water supply systems built post the 1908 Musi River floods. Even by early 20th century standards, Hyderabad city had street lights, underground drainage, public libraries, trolley trams, and one of India's first airports for private flights. Hyderabad was not just culturally refined, it was technologically ahead of most princely capitals. The Nizam's government allocated over 15% of its annual budget to public welfare. State-funded dispensaries and hospitals were opened in all major districts. Midwifery centers were available in rural regions. Water testing labs were set up in the 1930s, decades before India's municipal hygiene standards were enforced. Sanitation drives, plague control teams, and street cleaning protocols were in place by 1905. Education was similarly prioritized. Over 1,000 schools operated in Urdu, Telugu, and Marathi. Scholarships were given for students to study abroad in law, science, and medicine. Women's education received state funding through Zanana schools and later formal colleges. This wasn't charity, it was institutionalized governance, long before India became a republic. By the 1940s, Hyderabad was the largest princely state in India, home to over 16 million people, a sovereign economy with its own bank, currency, trade network, and educational ecosystem. And yet, it was ruled by a king whose power was mostly ceremonial. The British still influenced key decisions. Independence was near. But for Hyderabad, it would not come easily. The economic independence it had spent 2 centuries building would soon collide with political reality, and the storm was just beginning to form. Hyderabad wasn't rich because it was royal. It was royal because it was rich in foresight, balance, and long-term planning. In an India fractured by colonialism and internal decay, Hyderabad quietly proved that a native state, rooted in tradition but forward-looking, could thrive without foreign hands on the wheel. But money cannot stop history, and sovereignty isn't funded only in coins or contracts. It must be defended or it will be taken. And that is exactly what would happen next. If you are beginning to see how Hyderabad was more than a princely playground, if you are starting to understand it as a functional economic miracle that predated modern India, subscribe now. Because next chapter is Osmania era, modernization and identity, where we enter the reign of last great Nizam, Mir Usman Ali Khan, and see how he tried to hold it all together, one hospital, one bank, and one dream at a time.